The ground boys were getting slaughtered. We brought them hell from below the clouds. I could hear the screaming through my radio headset even before I saw the battlefield. Lieutenant Murphy's voice crackled with static and desperation as he called for immediate air support. Any aircraft, this is ground control forward. We have friendlies pinned down at coordinates 7849. Multiple machine gun nests. We're taking heavy casualties. We need help now. My name is Captain Jack Morrison, and on that sweltering morning of November 15, 1942, I was flying a Bell P-400 Airacobra over the green hill of Papua New Guinea. The P-400 wasn't supposed to be a bomber. Hell, it wasn't even supposed to be in the Pacific. These planes were originally built for the British, but when they rejected them as inadequate for European combat, Uncle Sam shipped them to us poor bastards fighting the Japanese in the Southwest Pacific. But on that day, with American infantry dying in the jungle below, my P-400 and I were about to prove that sometimes the wrong plane in the right hands could make all the difference. The mission had started like any other at Port Moresby. I'd been awakened at 0430 hours by the sound of Japanese Betty bombers droning overhead, their engines creating that distinctive unsynchronized rhythm that meant trouble. The air raid sirens were already wailing as I rolled out of my cot in the sweltering tent that served as officers' quarters. "Morning, Jack," called out my wingman, Second Lieutenant Tommy Rodriguez, as we stumbled toward the mess tent in the pre-dawn darkness. "Looks like Tojo's boys are giving us their usual wake-up call." Tommy was 22 years old, fresh from flight school in Texas, with dark hair and the kind of optimism that only comes from never having seen your friends die in burning cockpits. He'd been in theater for exactly 3 weeks, and I'd been trying to keep him alive ever since. The mess tent was buzzing with activity despite the early hour. Pilots, mechanics, and ground crew wolfed down powdered eggs and bitter coffee while discussing the overnight intelligence reports. The Japanese had been pushing hard toward Port Moresby for months, and our forces were stretched thin across the Owen Stanley Mountains. "Listen up, gentlemen," called out Major Bill Hendricks, our squadron commander, as he entered the tent with a fresh batch of orders. "We've got a situation developing near Buna. The 32nd Infantry Division is advancing on Japanese positions, but they've run into heavy resistance. Multiple fortified machine gun nests have them pinned down in a clearing about 15 miles northeast of here." He spread a map across one of the wooden tables, pointing to a small marked area. "The ground commander is requesting immediate close air support. The problem is, these positions are too close to our own troops for conventional bombing runs. We need precision strikes, and we need them fast." I studied the map, noting the terrain features and distance. "What kind of ordnance are we carrying, Major?" 500-pound general-purpose bombs, Hendricks replied. "Each aircraft will carry one under the fuselage. You'll be flying nap of the earth, coming in low and fast to avoid enemy anti-aircraft fire." Nap of the earth. That meant flying so low we'd be dodging treetops, following the contours of the jungle terrain to stay below enemy radar and gun sights. It was dangerous flying in any aircraft, but in a P-400 loaded with a heavy bomb, it was borderline suicidal. "Sir," spoke up Lieutenant Dave Collins, one of our more experienced pilots, "the P-400 isn't designed for ground attack missions. We don't have dive brakes, and the bomb sight is pretty basic." Major Hendricks nodded grimly. "I know, Dave. But we're what's available, and those boys on the ground don't have time to wait for proper dive bombers. You'll be making shallow bombing runs, coming in at about 200 feet. Drop your ordnance and get out fast." As we walked toward the flight line, Tommy fell into step beside me. "Jack, I've never done a bombing run before. In training, we only practiced air-to-air combat." I clapped him on the shoulder. "Don't worry, kid. Just stay on my wing and do exactly what I do. The most important thing is speed and surprise. We get in fast, drop our bombs, and get the hell out before the Japanese know what hit them." The P-400 Airacobra was a unique aircraft, and not necessarily in a good way. Unlike most fighters, its engine was mounted behind the pilot, with the propeller shaft running between the pilot's legs. This gave it an unusual center of gravity and made it nose heavy when loaded with ordnance. The 37mm cannon in the nose was impressive, but the plane's performance at altitude was disappointing compared to Japanese fighters. However, at low altitude, the P-400 was reasonably fast and maneuverable. More importantly, it was tough. The Bell Aircraft Company had built these planes to take punishment, and that was exactly what we needed for low-level ground attack missions. As I walked around my aircraft during the pre-flight inspection, I could see the 500-pound bomb hanging beneath the fuselage. The ordnance crew had painted for Hirohito on the side of the bomb in white letters. It was the Kindorf dark humor that helped us cope with the reality of what we were about to do. "All systems check out, Captain," reported Sergeant Mike O'Brien, my crew chief. "She's fueled and ready to go. The bomb release mechanism is armed and tested." "Thanks, Sarge. Keep her ready for a quick turnaround. Something tells me we might need to make more than one trip today." At 0800 hours, 4 P-400s lined up on the Coral runway at Port Moresby. Besides Tommy and myself, the flight included Lieutenant Collins and Captain Pete Williams, a veteran with over 50 combat missions under his belt. Williams would be leading the second element while I led the first. The takeoff was always the most nervous moment when carrying a heavy bomb load. The P-400 needed every inch of runway to get airborne with the extra weight, and the coral surface was rough enough to shake your teeth loose. I advanced the throttle slowly, feeling the Allison V1710 engine behind me wind up to full power. The propeller bit into the humid air, and we began rolling forward. Beside me, Tommy's aircraft kept perfect formation as we accelerated down the runway. At 110 miles per hour, I pulled back gently on the stick, and the P-400 reluctantly lifted off. The jungle canopy rushed past below us as we climbed slowly toward our cruising altitude of 1,000 feet. "Red flight, this is Red Leader," I called over the radio. "Form up on me. We'll follow the coast northeast until we reach the Buna area, then turn inland to find our target." The flight to the battle area took 25 minutes. Below us, the landscape changed from coastal plains to dense jungle, broken by rivers and steep ridges. The Owain Stanley Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks shrouded in clouds. It was beautiful country, but I knew that beauty hid countless dangers. As we approached the target area, I could see smoke rising from several locations in the jungle. The distinctive crack of rifle fire and the deeper thump of machine guns drifted up even through the engine noise. "Red Leader, this is ground control forward," crackled Lieutenant Murphy's voice over the radio. "We have you in sight. The target is a cluster of 3 machine gun positions on a ridge approximately 500 meters north of our position. They're dug in with log and earth fortifications. We'll mark our position with yellow smoke." I banked left and spotted the yellow smoke grenade below. American soldiers were scattered in whatever cover they could find in a small clearing, pinned down by intense machine gun fire from higher ground. Even from 1,000 feet up, I could see muzzle flashes winking from the Japanese positions. "Red 2, Red 3, Red 4, this is Red Leader. Target is on the ridge north of the yellow smoke. We'll make our approach from the west, coming in low and fast. Drop on my mark and climb out to the south. Watch for ground fire." I pushed the stick forward and began descending toward the treetops. The altimeter unwound rapidly as we dropped from 1,000 feet to 500, then 300, then 200. The jungle canopy filled my windscreen, individual trees becoming distinct as we raced toward the target. At 200 feet, traveling at nearly 300 miles per hour, I could see the Japanese positions clearly. They had chosen their ground well, with overlapping fields of fire and excellent camouflage. Each machine gun nest was surrounded by fallen logs and covered with jungle vegetation. No wonder the infantry couldn't advance. Steady, red flight. Bomb doors open. Here we go. The first burst of anti-aircraft fire came from my left, red tracers arcing past my wing. The Japanese had positioned at least one anti-aircraft gun to defend their positions, and they were tracking us as we came in. More tracers reached up from the ridge, forcing me to jinx slightly to avoid the worst of it. Red Leader, you've got ground fire at your 2 o'clock. Tommy's voice was tight with tension. I see it, Red 2. Stay with me. At 150 feet above the ground, racing toward the first machine gun nest at nearly 300 miles per hour, I could see individual Japanese soldiers manning their weapons. Some were firing rifles at us, the muzzle flashes tiny pinpricks in the green jungle. Others were feeding ammunition belts into machine guns that continued to pour fire down on the American positions. Bombs away. I pressed the bomb release button and felt the P-400 jump slightly as the 500-pound bomb separated from the aircraft. Immediately, I pulled back hard on the stick and banked right, climbing rapidly to clear the ridge line. Behind me, I could hear the other aircraft in my flight making their attacks. The explosion came 3 seconds later, a tremendous boom that shook the entire aircraft even at our climbing altitude. I looked back to see a column of black smoke and debris rising from where the first machine gun nest had been. Direct hit. Red 2 bombs away. Tommy called out as his ordnance impacted near the second position. Another explosion, another column of smoke. Lieutenant Collins and Captain Williams followed in rapid succession, their bombs bracketing the remaining Japanese positions. Within 30 seconds, all 4 P-400s had delivered their ordnance and were climbing away from the target area. Red Leader, this is ground control forward, came Murphy's excited voice. Outstanding work, direct hits on all 3 positions. The machine gun fire has stopped completely. We're moving forward now. But our mission wasn't over. As we climbed back to altitude, I could see more muzzle flashes from other positions further up the ridge. The Japanese had more than just 3 machine gun nests defending this area. Red Flight, this is Red Leader. I see more targets on the northern end of the ridge. We're going back to base to rearm and refuel, then we'll come back for another pass. The flight back to Port Moresby gave us time to assess what we'd accomplished and what still needed to be done. The P-400 had performed better than expected in the ground attack role. The aircraft was stable at low altitude, and the bomb release system worked perfectly. Most importantly, we'd achieved the precision required to support friendly troops in close contact with the enemy. Jack, that was incredible. Tommy's voice was full of excitement as we flew back toward base. Did you see that first explosion? We completely destroyed that position. Good work, Red 2. But stay focused. We're going back out there in an hour, and the Japanese will be ready for us this time. Back at Port Moresby, the ground crew had our aircraft refueled and rearmed in record time. Sergeant O'Brien and his team worked with the efficiency born of combat experience, knowing that every minute counted for the troops in contact. How'd she handle, Captain? O'Brien asked as I climbed down from the cockpit. Like a dream, Sarge. The bomb release worked perfectly, and she flew straight and true even at low altitude. Get her ready for another go. While the crew worked on the aircraft, I grabbed a quick cup of coffee and studied the updated intelligence reports. Radio intercepts indicated that the Japanese were reinforcing their positions with troops moved up from Buna. Our second mission would be more dangerous, but also more critical. Gentlemen, Major Hendricks briefed us 4th Second Sortie. Ground control reports excellent results from your first mission. The infantry has advanced approximately 200 meters and is now engaging secondary Japanese positions. However, they've identified a new threat. He pointed to the map again. Intelligence reports that the Japanese are moving a 75mm mountain gun into position to shell our advancing troops. This gun must be neutralized immediately or we'll lose everything we've gained. A 75mm mountain gun was a serious threat to infantry. These weapons could fire high explosive shells with deadly accuracy, and they were nearly impossible for ground troops to assault directly. It would be our job to find and destroy it before it could be brought into action. "Sir, do we have coordinates for this gun?" asked Captain Williams. "Negative. It's mobile, and the Japanese are keeping it concealed in the jungle. You'll need to hunt for it. Look for muzzle flashes, vehicle movement, or any signs of artillery preparation. This second mission would be different from the first. Instead of attacking fixed positions with known coordinates, we'd be conducting armed reconnaissance, searching for targets of opportunity while under fire. It was the most dangerous type of mission a pilot could fly. At 1100 hours, our 4 P-400s took off again from Port Moresby, each carrying another 500-pound bomb plus a full load of 37mm cannon ammunition. The plan was to use our cannons against personnel and light vehicles while saving the bombs for the mountain gun. As we approached the battle area for the second time, the situation on the ground had clearly intensified. Smoke was rising from multiple locations, and I could see American troops advancing through the jungle in small groups. The Japanese were falling back, but they were fighting for every yard. "Red Leader, this is ground control forward. We've advanced another 300 meters since your last attack, but we're taking artillery fire from somewhere north of our position. The shells are coming in every 2 or 3 minutes. Artillery fire meant the Japanese gun was already in action. We needed to find it quickly before it could do serious damage to the advancing American forces." "Roger, ground control. We'll search the northern sector. Mark your forward positions with smoke so we don't hit friendlies." I led the flight in a wide circle around the battle area, looking for any sign of the enemy gun. At 1,000 feet, scanning the jungle canopy below, it was like looking for a needle in a haystack. The Japanese were masters of camouflage, and a 75mm mountain gun could be hidden under a few branches and be virtually invisible from the air. Then I saw a brief flash of movement in a small clearing about 800 meters north of the American positions. Something metallic had reflected sunlight for just an instant before disappearing back under the jungle canopy. "Red Flight, this is Red Leader. I have a possible target at 2 o'clock, small clearing with what looks like a camouflage vehicle. We'll go down for a closer look." I pushed the stick forward and began descending toward the suspicious area. At 500 feet, I could make out details on the ground. There was definitely something man-made in that clearing, something the Japanese were trying very hard to hide. As we dropped to 300 feet, anti-aircraft fire erupted from multiple positions around the clearing. The Japanese had been waiting for us, setting up a trap with their mountain gun as bait. Red tracers filled the air around our formation as we dove toward the target. "Red Flight, break formation. Evasive action." I jinked hard left as a stream of machine gun bullets passed through the space where my aircraft had been seconds before. The Japanese had learned from our first attack and positioned anti-aircraft guns to cover their artillery position. At 200 feet, racing toward the clearing at maximum speed, I could finally see the target clearly. It was indeed a 75mm mountain gun, partially disassembled for transport, but being rapidly assembled by its crew. Japanese soldiers were scattered around the weapon, some manning it while others fed ammunition. "This is it, Red Flight. That's our target." But as I lined up for my bombing run, I realized we had a problem. The mountain gun was positioned at the edge of the clearing, with large trees on 3 sides. There was only one approach angle that would allow us to attack without flying directly into the trees, and the Japanese anti-aircraft guns were concentrated to cover exactly that approach. "Red 2, Red 3, Red 4, follow me in single file. We'll make individual attacks from the south. Drop your bombs and climb out immediately." The anti-aircraft fire intensified as I began my attack run. Red tracers crisscrossed in front of my aircraft, and I could hear bullets hitting my wings and fuselage. The P-400 shuddered under the impact but kept flying. At 150 feet above the ground, I could see the Japanese gun crew frantically trying to traverse their weapon to fire at us. The 75mm gun was designed for ground targets, not aircraft, but if they managed to hit us with a high explosive shell, it would be all over. Bombs away. I released my bomb directly over the mountain gun and immediately pulled into a climbing right turn. The anti-aircraft fire followed me up, tracers arcing past my wingtips as I climbed desperately for altitude. The explosion came just as I cleared the tree line. The 500-pound bomb detonated directly on top of the Japanese gun position, sending pieces of the weapon and its crew flying in all directions. Secondary explosions followed as ammunition for the gun cooked off in the intense heat. "Direct hit," called Tommy over the radio. "The gun is completely destroyed." But we weren't out of danger yet. As Tommy began his attack run on secondary targets in the area, more anti-aircraft fire erupted from concealed positions. The Japanese had positioned multiple machine guns and light anti-aircraft weapons throughout the jungle, turning the entire area into a deadly trap. "Red 2, you got ground fire from your 10 o'clock. I called out as I saw tracers reaching up toward Tommy's aircraft. Tommy's P-400 was hit repeatedly as he made his bombing run. I could see holes appearing in his wings and fuselage, but he held his course steady until he released his bomb over a cluster of Japanese positions. "Red 2, are you hit?" I called as Tommy pulled up from his attack. "Yeah, I'm hit pretty bad, Jack. Engine's running rough, and I'm losing oil pressure. I don't think I can make it back to base." My heart sank. Tommy was a good kid, and I'd promised myself I'd keep him alive. Now he was flying a damaged aircraft over enemy territory, and his chances of survival were dropping with his oil pressure. "Red 2, head for the coast. If you have to bail out, do it over water where the rescue boats can pick you up." Meanwhile, Lieutenant Collins and Captain Williams continued their attacks on the Japanese positions. Their bombs impacted among the anti-aircraft gun positions, silencing several of the weapons that had been firing at us. But as Williams pulled up from his attack run, his aircraft was hit by what looked like a 20mm anti-aircraft shell. The explosion took away most of his left wing, and the P-400 immediately went into an uncontrollable spin. "Red 4 is going down," I called over the radio. "Pete, can you hear me?" There was no response from Williams' aircraft as it spiraled down into the jungle. I watched helplessly as the P-400 crashed into the trees and exploded in a ball of orange flame. Captain Pete Williams, a veteran with over 50 combat missions, was gone in an instant. The loss of Williams hit our small formation hard, but we still had a mission to complete. Collins and I continued to work over the Japanese positions with our 37mm cannons strafing any target that showed itself. The 37mm cannon in the nose of the P-400 was devastating against ground targets. Each shell was the size of a small artillery round, and they could punch through light armor and fortifications with ease. We made repeated strafing passes, destroying vehicles, ammunition dumps, and personnel in the open. "Red Leader, this is ground control forward," came Murphy's voice over the radio. "Outstanding work up there. The artillery fire has stopped completely, and we can see secondary explosions all over the target area. The Japanese are pulling back." As we climbed away from the target area for the final time, I could see American troops advancing rapidly through the jungle. Without the machine gun nests and artillery to pin them down, they were making excellent progress toward their objectives. But the cost had been high. Captain Williams was dead, and Tommy was struggling to keep his damaged aircraft in the air. As I looked over at his P-400, I could see oil streaming back from his engine and covering his windscreen. "Jack, I'm not going to make it back to base," Tommy called over the radio. "The engine's seizing up, and I'm losing altitude. Red 2, you're almost to the coast. Just hold on for another 5 minutes." But Tommy's engine caused that moment to fail completely. The propeller windmilled to a stop, and his P-400 began gliding toward the jungle below. Without power, he had maybe 2 minutes of flight time left. "Jack, I'm going down. Tell my folks back home that I got the bastards who killed Pete." I watched as Tommy's aircraft disappeared below the jungle canopy, somewhere near the coast, but still over land. There was no explosion, which gave me hope that he might have survived the crash landing. "Ground control, this is Red Leader. Red 2 is down approximately 2 miles inland from the coast. Coordinate search and rescue operations immediately." "Roger, Red Leader. Rescue teams are being dispatched." Lieutenant Collins and I flew back to Port Moresby in silence, both of us thinking about the friends we'd lost that day. The mission had been a success. We had destroyed the Japanese machine gun nests and artillery that were holding up the American advance. But the price had been high. As we approached Port Moresby, I could see the other aircraft of our squadron lined up on the flight line. Mechanics and ground crew were already preparing for the next mission. In the Southwest Pacific, there was always another mission. I brought my P-400 in for landing, feeling the coral runway rough beneath the wheels. As I taxied toward the parking area, I could see Major Hendricks waiting with the intelligence officers for our debriefing. "How'd it go, Jack?" asked Sergeant O'Brien as I climbed down from the cockpit. "We got the targets, Sarge. But we lost Pete Williams, and Tommy Rodriguez is down somewhere near the coast." O'Brien nodded grimly. He'd seen too many good pilots not come back to show much emotion, but I could see the sadness in his eyes. Pete Williams had been popular with the ground crew, always taking time to talk with the mechanics and thank them for their work. The debriefing took an hour. I described our attacks in detail, marking target locations on maps and estimating damage inflicted in Japanese positions. The intelligence officers were particularly interested in our assessment of Japanese anti-aircraft defenses, which had been much stronger than expected. "Based on your observations, Captain Morrison," said Colonel James Patterson, the group intelligence officer, "we estimate that your flight destroyed at least 3 machine gun nests, 1 75mm mountain gun, 2 anti-aircraft positions, and approximately 30 to 40 Japanese personnel. The ground forces report significant advances following your attacks. It was a successful mission by any measure, but I couldn't forget cost. 2 P-400s lost, 1 pilot dead, and another missing and probably captured or killed. In the brutal mathematics of war, it was considered an acceptable exchange, but that didn't make it any easier to accept." That evening, I sat outside my tent and wrote letters to the families of Pete Williams and Tommy Rodriguez. What do you tell a mother whose son died attacking Japanese positions in a jungle on the other side of the world? How do you explain that her boy died bravely, doing his duty, helping save the lives of other American soldiers? I was still writing when Lieutenant Collins found me. "Jack, I just got word from the rescue teams. They found Tommy's aircraft." I looked up hopefully. "Is he alive?" Collins shook his head slowly. "I'm sorry, Jack. He was killed in the crash. The rescue team said it looked like he tried to put the plane down in a small clearing, but hit the trees. He never had a chance." I stared out at the jungle for a long time after Collins left. 2 more good men were gone, added to the growing list of friends I'd lost in this war. Tommy Rodriguez, 22 years old, from San Antonio, Texas. Pete Williams, 26, from Portland, Oregon. They died attacking Japanese positions with aircraft that weren't designed for the mission, but they'd done their job anyway. The next morning brought news of the ground operation's success. The 32nd Infantry Division had advanced over a mile, capturing several key positions and taking numerous Japanese prisoners. The enemy forces in the area had been scattered, their organized resistance broken by the combination of ground assault and air attack. Major Hendricks called me into his tent after breakfast. "Jack, I'm putting you in for a distinguished flying cross for yesterday's mission." You showed exceptional courage and leadership under fire, and your attacks were directly responsible for the success of the ground operation. Thank you, sir, but I was just doing my job. Pete Williams and Tommy Rodriguez deserve recognition too. They'll both receive posthumous decorations, Hendricks assured me. The Air Force doesn't forget pilots who give their lives for their country. Over the following weeks, our squadron continued to fly ground support missions throughout the Papua New Guinea campaign. The P-400, despite its limitations, proved to be an effective ground attack aircraft when flown by experienced pilots. We learned to use its strengths, durability, firepower, and stability at low altitude while working around its weaknesses. The Japanese forces in Papua New Guinea were gradually pushed back toward the coast. Our air attacks, combined with the advancing ground forces, made it impossible for them to maintain their defensive positions. By January 1943, the threat to Port Moresby had been eliminated, and Allied forces were preparing to take the offensive. But the cost had been enormous. Our squadron alone lost 8 P-400s and 6 pilots during the Papua New Guinea campaign. Across the Southwest Pacific, hundreds of aircraft and aircrew were lost in the grinding warfare against a determined and skillful enemy. The Japanese losses were even higher. Intelligence estimates suggested that they lost over 200 aircraft and thousands of ground personnel in Papua New Guinea. Their dreams of capturing Port Moresby and threatening Australia had been crushed by the combined efforts of Allied ground and air forces. As I look back on that November day in 1942, I remember most clearly the moment when Tommy Rodriguez called out over the radio that he wasn't going to make it home. In that moment, a 22-year-old kid from Texas showed the kind of courage that won the war in the Pacific. He could have bailed out over friendly territory and saved himself, but he stayed with his aircraft and completed his mission, even knowing it would cost him his life. That's the story that needs to be told about World War II in the Pacific. Not just the statistics of aircraft destroyed and battles won, but the individual stories of young Americans who faced impossible odds and did their duty anyway. They flew aircraft that weren't designed for their missions, fought an enemy that showed no mercy, and died far from home in service to their country. The P-400 Airacobra was never supposed to be a bomber, but in the hands of American pilots, it became whatever the mission required. We brought hell to the Japanese forces from below the clouds, flying low and fast through murderous anti-aircraft fire to deliver our ordnance with precision and deadly effect. The ground boys were getting slaughtered, but we didn't let them down. We brought them hell from below the clouds, and we helped turn the tide of war in the Pacific. It cost us friends, aircraft, and pieces of our souls, but we did our job. In the end, that's all any of us could do, our job, and hope it was enough to make a difference. The war in the Pacific would continue for nearly 3 more years after Papua New Guinea, but the pattern had been set. American forces, supported by increasingly effective air power, would advance from island to island, pushing the Japanese back toward their home islands. Each battle would cost lives, but each victory brought us closer to ending the war and bringing our boys home. I survived the war, flying 89 combat missions in P-400s, P-39s, and eventually P-51 Mustangs. I came home to a hero's welcome, married my sweetheart, and raised a family in peacetime America. But I never forgot the friends who didn't make it home, the young men who died in burning aircraft over hostile jungles, fighting for a cause they believed in with everything they had. Their sacrifice made victory possible. Their courage in the face of overwhelming odds proved that free men, fighting for a just cause, could overcome any enemy. The Japanese had superior aircraft, experienced pilots, and the advantage of fighting close to their bases, but they couldn't match the determination of Americans who refused to accept defeat. That's the lesson of Papua New Guinea and of the entire Pacific War. When American servicemen were faced with an impossible mission, they found a way to make it possible. When their equipment wasn't adequate for the job, they made it work anyway. When the odds were against them, they fought harder and smarter until they turned those odds around. We brought hell from below the clouds because that's what the mission required. And in the end, that made all the difference.